I would like to introduce to the stage with me Ben Perry. Ben Perry, as I said, is one of our UX leads at JISC. I'm going to ask him to do a little bit of an introduction of himself as well, and also a little bit of his career history, so you can understand sort of where he's come from. And then, as I said, we're going to actually have a chat about sort of the career journey and how to get into UX and the things that sort of people look for. So, Ben, if you would please, it's over to you.
Hello. Afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I don't know whether to sort of jump into an introduction or just kind of sort of start off on sort of my career journey and stuff, because it'll kind of be a bit of a long introduction, if you will. But yeah, really short. I am the UX team lead in JISC. I'm currently managing 3 trainee team leads, and I think our UX team in JISC is now up to about 13 people. We've gone through a period of rapid growth in the organization as an organization, like we've matured around UX a little bit more and kind of understood the need for UX resource in the organization. So we've had to adapt, had to scale, and had to grow. So yeah, my role itself has changed quite a lot over the last, over the years as well. So yeah, I can kind of talk you through exactly kind of what my journeys look like, how I kind of got into it, and kind of what my career path looks like. So yeah, if I start at the beginning, I think from being at sort of secondary school, I was really interested in kind of all things design, and I've always been interested in as a kid sort of like taking stuff to bits and kind of like working out how things work. Like I constantly had my bike in bits on the garage floor, or like stereos, and just kind of like looking at how things work. So I was always really kind of like inquisitive and interested in just understanding how things worked and how things were put together. And then I suppose the thing that really caught my attention at secondary school, the thing that I was really passionate about was art, and I really got into, really enjoyed art as a subject. It was the one thing that I thought kind of catered to my kind of creative needs, and really poured myself into that. I think I probably had a bit of a friendship group of people who were all similarly creative and interested in that sort of thing. But yeah, art was really my big subject. Was also pretty decent at maths at school. Like that was, maths is definitely something you need as a UX, as a career in your career at UX. But yeah, kind of like art and maths were my 2 subjects that I did really well in. But yeah, I suppose kind of coming out of school and kind of looking at my career ahead of there, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I was interested in particularly art as a topic. I've got a background, I used to skateboard a lot as well. So, skateboarding was quite a creative hobby, quite a creative sort of industry as well. So I definitely liked that side of things and was kind of like, what can I do when I go to college? So looking at, at college courses and options that I could take to sort of move on from secondary school, I moved on to do an art and design qualification. I think it was like a BTEC diploma in art and design, which kind of took me into that kind of further education environment where it's much more focused, and you meet a lot more like-minded people, because people are going to further education. They're sort of specializing in the things that they're interested in learning more about, and kind of was exposed to a lot of other people who were kind of had that same sort of mindset as me, and were creative and interested in all these sorts of things. So yeah, I did my sort of 2-year course. I kind of had a bit of a wobble at that point, and kind of had some other interesting things, what with skateboarding. I was really interested in music as well, and used to play the drums, and kind of didn't really know what I wanted to sort of do with my career at that point, because I think I felt like I'd gone through the mill and gone through this kind of, you're at school and then you kind of push to go to college and then you push to go to university. And I kind of wanted to sort of take stock and really think about what I wanted to do. I suppose at that point, I kind of had some ambitions to become a session musician, and was really interested in becoming a session drummer. and ended up going to a new teacher who was teaching me the drums, and just really fell out with them. Just didn't get on with them as a teacher, and that kind of unfortunately put paid to that career pathway. I kind of fell out of my love with the instrument at that point because just didn't gel with the teacher that I'd moved on to, and then decided to go back to college to kind of do a course that would enable me to kind of go on to university. I was thinking, right, no, I do actually want to go to university. I do want to study, a a higher education level. So I went back um, to the college that I went to and took an additional course that helped me to kind of get the grades that I really needed to get into university. Because I suppose, like any art college, going to an art college is a bunch of late teens, early 20s. There's so much other distractions in the world that kind of come at you, and um you get led down all sorts of paths. And maybe I didn't kind of focus on my career at the time too much, and just kind of went through the motions and I think I just got a pass at um my further education level. So I did an extra course that would get me the credits and stuff to get myself into a university degree. And I applied to go to the University of Manchester Metropolitan University at the time. I was living down in Eastbourne, right on the south coast, and I really wanted to break away from where I was and what I was doing. So I applied to Manchester Metropolitan University and got on the degree course there, which was 3D design. So this was more focused in on tactile objects. It really covered. This course really covered a huge amount of subject matter from product design to digital design using tools like AutoCAD and 3D Studio Max was at the time, to metalwork, jewelry, glass blowing, ceramics, like loads of different, real variety of topics. The idea really was it was about exploring materials and exploring design as a concept, and then it kind of like narrowed you in over the course of the 3-year degree into like a particular field. And I kind of ended up kind of going down this sort of designer maker, if you will, route, where it was all about sort of small scale design for production, like handmade objects and small scale production objects. And from there, there was an additional year that you could do to sort of specialize in sort of business development. So I stayed on at university for another year to do this sort of additional tack on year for business sort of development, because I was like, yeah, I'm going to go out and be self-employed. I'm going to be a designer. So I did that, and then was offered a place it was a design council, sort of strayed away from design as a theme, or art and design, and kind of just picked up some random jobs and doing various bits and pieces through contacts that I knew. But ultimately I kind of then started coming back to design, because I'd doing all sorts of bits and bobs. I would have, made friends with people in creative industries, in terms of skateboarding, and, made a lot of friends through kind of music and people that would do like putting bands on and running events and things. So I started to kind of get a bit more into graphic design, and started doing some, branding and design work for friends and friends of friends, and doing more and more of that. And then naturally that led me on to people sort of, I suppose this is all, I'm talking kind of mid 2000s era here. It was the kind of the rise of kind of Facebook and MySpace and everything like that. And there was lots of people out there who were really trying to kind of create a web presence for themselves, which is what led me on to getting into more and more of digital design. So I started doing that as a freelancer and kind of just working it out for myself. So I found myself moving from this kind of background in graphic design. People wanted me to do more and more kind of digital design stuff for them, to help them set up their websites, help them set up their kind of social media presence, and all these different things. And it was going really well. And then I just happened to see they were advertising for what the job title was, a creative designer at the University of Manchester, and it was a part-time job, so 50% of my time, and that was doing both web design and visual design for an organization called Mimus. So they are, essentially, Mimus got brought into JISC at one point, but I was essentially doing, visual design and web design for digital products in that role. And that's where I really kind of found UX and found a lot more people who were kind of knew about that UX as a term, and very quickly became clear that this is kind of demystifying everything that I was kind of working towards and all the challenges that I was facing. I was like, well, UX is the answer here. This is the thing. And then in that role, I was, lucky enough to get the opportunity to kind of work on some projects there with external agencies. One of the critical agencies I suppose I worked with was a company called CX Partners, who are based, I think they're based all across the UK, but I primarily interacted with them in Bristol. And I learned so much from them as an agency and saw what they did and saw their approach and attitude towards UX. And I was like, that's what I want to do. Like, I want to do that. I'm really interested in this. I was really kind of passionate about, how do things work? What, how do users want them to work? And, being kind of in and around kind of the explosion of social media and apps and smartphones, kind of in my 20s, I was really interested in like trying to make these things work better. So, and at the same time, the organization Mimus that I worked for merged together with JISC, which is the place that I'm currently working at. And at that point, they had a secondment, an internal opportunity for a UX designer. Well, it's called a UX specialist at the point, and that was the first ever UX role that JISC had. So I put myself forward for it and said, I'd be really keen to do this. And I'm not going to lie, I think the recruiting manager at the time kind of looked at my CV and my background and said, you really clearly know a lot about the design, the graphic design and the visual design, UI design elements of UX, but you don't know a huge amount about like the research side of things. You've clearly got a big skills gap in the research area. But they still offered me the job and said, look, do you want to take this on? But we'll have to set some particular targets and everything in terms of like developing those research skills. So I was over the moon. Got my first role as a UX person in JISC as an organization. I suppose I spent about 2.5 years in that role really as a sponge. Any opportunity that we got to work with an agency or with other people who were more knowledgeable on any topic than me, particularly interested in the research side of things, was just absorbing all the information that I could and anything that I could get from anyone. And then, I've essentially just sort of worked my way up within this organization from there. So I moved from being a UX specialist to being a senior UX specialist. So at that point, I was taking on higher kind of order challenges in the organization. So not just working on one project, but starting to work on multiple projects at the same time, and projects that have kind of more applicability across multiple products. And then that's naturally led through into, more and more UX designers have started to join JISC as an organization. So that led to us sort of forming the UX team in JISC. So I was at that point became the sort of the first UX team lead, and I was managing a group of UXers. I suppose how I got myself to the point where I got into a management role, like I had sort of seen that as a bit of a career trajectory for me, and I had some really good managers at the time who'd seen that I had a natural sort of talent for, putting myself out there and building relationships and working with people. So they'd said, oh, I think you should probably do some upskilling in leadership and management. So I had, over the course of my kind of career, done some certification and accreditations in leadership and management. So when that opportunity presented itself to sort of start building out that UX team, I was really keen to take it on. So I'm at that point now where I'm kind of progressed to pretty much to the sort of the top of what we would consider a UX team lead in JISC. And I suppose I'm now looking at my next step within the organization to the kind of the head of UX level. What does that look like? How does that work for us as an organization? So I'm looking at, what my next step is in my career. And, sometimes I think it's, you have to be realistic about, what is, some of those roles that you're looking for may not even exist there isn't a head of UX in the organization. There were, team leaders as far as it goes. But I do think, with many things, you can kind of carve that niche out for yourself in an organization and kind of if you can prove that there's a business need for that role and identify what that role looks like, you can kind of almost write your own job description and say, this is what I want to do. I've proved the need. I can do this. Give me the chance, or set me the metrics, set me some goals and targets. And if I deliver on them, can you give me the opportunity to have a job evaluation or something like that? And, so essentially that's kind of how I've got to where I've got now. I'm on the verge of sort of thinking about, well, what's my next move? What does that look like in JISC as an organization? Yeah, I think that brings us kind of up to date in my career journey.
Which seems very, very. It doesn't look the obvious linear path, which I think is really fantastic for people to see.
Yeah, I
I
think it was like a few moments of like, I think there's been a thread of design kind of through my career pathway, and like interested in kind of creative stuff, but it's sort of veered. I don't think it's just, there's this notion of a squiggly career path where you jump across all these different things. I think it was a wobbly career path, so it's kind of wobbled in and out of creative-y, designy type roles. So I think you can draw a thread through it that looks relatively straight, but yeah.
So with that in mind then, and just before we move on to sort of the hiring and the sort of recruitment side of things for other people, obviously we can see that you've had quite an interesting path to where you are now, but on more than one occasion it looks like you've kind of been at the leading edge where you're there right when sort of roles and things are starting to be created, so then you're sort of forging ahead with them, and doing exactly now when you're looking at sort of head of UX roles as well. If you went back to when you were at, say, college and sort of being heavily influenced by external things like music and skateboarding, things like that, is there any one sort of aspect as you were coming through that with your sort of current head on looking back, you would sit there and go, actually, do you know what? That was really helpful. Is there any one area which you felt sort of gave you more of a stepping stone, or is it equal across all of them?
I know we had a conversation about this, and I think there's two things in here for me that I think I kind of want to talk about. So one is I do, and I can talk about this a bit more. Like, as a hiring manager, what I'm looking for doesn't always tally with what I'm about to say, but I do think that the university course that I went on, like having those 3 years at university to really kind of deep dive into a specialism and explore and play, make mistakes, discover, fail, and really find your voice and find what you're interested in was really valuable for me. I think, it's a huge expense going to university, but 3 years studying in a creative type course like that really does allow you to explore the field and understand what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy. So I would say that was a critical step for me. I would say on the flip side of that, it's actually a huge sort of stepping stone for me has been the sort of the connections that I've made with people. And I know people will say that all the time about, oh, you need to do networking, but you really can't get away from the fact that a lot of my career progression has come from opportunities that have presented themselves to me because of people that I've known that have had absolutely nothing to do with sort of design as a field. Like, it's people that I know who, was a band promoter who wanted me to do a website for them, or somebody that was, a friend of a friend who was a small business owner who wanted some support with branding and website design for their tapas restaurant. These things kind of led on to projects that allowed me to develop my portfolio and allowed me to develop my skills that ultimately then kind of gave me the things that I need, the experience, the portfolio. I could talk enough about my role because, moving into a sort of design, I don't have a, web design or this is all just me sort of how I got that first job at the organization in this part-time creative designer job was showing them the portfolio of work that I'd done as a freelancer. Like, I haven't got a UI design or graphic design degree. I did a degree in kind of 3D object. So I was able to use that knowledge that I'd gained from my degree and apply that in a kind of a different context, both in terms of visual design, product design, or UX design. I think a lot of those fundamental design principles that you learn carry throughout everything, carry right throughout design as a practice.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. The other quick question I was going to ask you about as well, I found it really interesting, and it's just something I want to expand on a little bit, and we will talk more to Lucy later about this one. You did actually mention when you sort of moved into that first real big UX role within JISC, the recruiter, whether this was sort of being direct and blunt or whichever, sort of pointed out you don't have the research side, and design and research are two very separate areas of UX, as I'm aware. What's your thoughts on it from a business point of view? Because I know some businesses separate the roles out and others combine it together in a specialism for a UX individual. Just as a sort of a quick thought, how do you feel that works either independently or together?
I think, you can look across a lot of different sectors, a lot of different organizations, and you can totally justify having a UI designer, is a role, and they will touch on elements of user experience design, and you can have a user researcher. I think that's one of your, the sessions that you're hosting later is you have a user researcher on the call. You can have those two things as separate roles, and 100%, I think there is value to that. I think the reason, I can talk about the reason why we have UX designer as a job. As a role in JISC as an organization was very much as we formed the UX team. What we really needed as an organization was a UX people in the team who are Swiss Army knives, a UX team of one who can come in and we can drop them into a project and they could pick up UX across the spectrum, across the sort of skills spectrum. So they can do that initial product discovery, doing the research and the analysis of user interviews and stuff to sort of synthesize actually what is the real problem here, what's the problem that we're trying to solve, running workshops, ideation workshops of people to come up with ideas about how we solve them, and then that validation, like we've got all of that early kind of product discovery stuff that UX designers can do, but then we've also got what I call design delivery element, which is we know what we're doing, we know what problem we're trying to solve, but we need to come up with the right way to solve it. So that's very much about UI design, testing, validation, working closely with developers and like handing designs off for people. And at the time in JISC, we wanted generalists. We didn't want UI specialists and user research specialists. We wanted generalists that could be dropped into any project and be able to sort of essentially fulfill that need for that team.
Okay, no, that makes sense. I was just trying to sort of look at it because obviously anyone who is looking to find a role within UX may see different things and just sort of look at that a slightly different perspective. I'd like to do.
And I think.
Go on, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and I think as it's something that we're looking at. We have gone down this route in the UX team of JISC of kind of having this generalist job description, but we're now at 12 members of the team. So we've got to the point now where we've got enough generalists. So that's one of the things on my radar is to start to think about, not only in terms of recruitment, do we need to start bringing in people with a more of a specialist background, user researchers or UI designers or service designers, but what are those career progression opportunities for people within the team? Because going the route that I've taken and going into people management, within the field, isn't everyone's career path. They don't want to do that. They don't want to have to manage people because it is a particular set of skills that you would get onto. So I'm very much thinking about what is that specialist career pathway, and maybe we will always have entry level UX designers as a generalist, but once you start to kind of get towards more of a senior role, you can sort of opt to specialize into UI design or research or service design or something, and that's where at those progressive levels, that's where we start to sort of see divergence from that generalist role.
That's cool. It's like I said, always handy to have different perspectives. With that in mind, what I'd like to move on to then is the other part of what we're going to discuss today. And that is sort of recruiting UX specialists, designers, researchers, and so forth and so on. I mean, as many of you who've been on our events before will probably know, I work in product management, and not being able to have access to UX specialists, designers, so forth and so on is the bane of my life, because we always want to get stuff going, we always want to get stuff moving. And I can understand the frustration when you're trying to find good ones and things like that. So how do you find the good ones? How do you start recruiting them into the business? And what sorts of things are you looking for as a hiring manager?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Yeah. So I suppose, what am I? How do we find the good ones? What am I looking for as a hiring manager? I think it has been interesting recently in terms of our recruitment to sort of see what the sector's like. And when we've gone out and we've essentially A/B tested different recruitment methods. And our recruitment drive will be very much based on what projects we need people to work on, where the kind of the overall team is at. So bringing in, say, people who are less experienced in UX roles, we could only really do that when we have the capacity to sort of absorb somebody who's gonna, if this is their first role or their early career, let's say, like they are going to take more time from a manager, in terms of like helping them to develop their skills and their experiences, and and build them up. So sometimes we might want to hire people who are a little bit more senior, and in that case, we're looking for some experience in role. I'd 100% want to say, from my perspective, time in post doesn't equal quality of applicant. So I'm not just looking at how has this person got a minimum of 3 years worth of experience in a UX focused role. I'm clear that doesn't always tally up. I'm just looking for people who have got experience in in the relevant fields. Design, could be graphic design, it could have been leading projects, they could have a background in web development. But when we bring people to interview or looking at people's CVs, it needs to be clear to me that they do understand the field of UX and they understand what UX is, as a profession. I think when we're trying to hire junior or early career junior UX design people, that's when it becomes more. I mean, it's a different type of difficult, because there are a lot. When we go out, if I give the example of a bit of recruitment that we did recently, we put out a role where we explicitly asked for mid to seniors, and I think we had 15 applications for that over the course of a week. And then we put out a role that was essentially open to all levels of experience, and within 48 hours we'd had 88 applications for that. So the number of applications that we get for when we say it's open to all levels of experience is an order of magnitude higher normally than if we're specifically targeting people with a bit more experience, or trying to sort of couch it as this, we want people with a bit more experience. So then when you've got essentially all these CVs to look through, you do start looking at you have to have a bit more of a systematic approach to it and looking for that. And there's a lot of people out there who've got a similar background. They've have, what is their, again, looking at the same sorts of things that I was saying before, like, have they come through some other kind of relevant sort of sideways career path? Have they got a background in web development or graphic design? Have they come through some kind of product development role or something? And equally, sometimes it doesn't even matter what role they've had if this is their first move into UX. We're not as interested in that sort of stuff. I suppose it then becomes part of, when you've got a pool of people who've all got a similar level of experience and whatnot, we start to look at your portfolio. Does your portfolio look good? Is it got does it sort of sell your flair for design, and does it show us that you kind of understand UX process and stuff? But I think importantly, it's a lot of it's like, how would this person fit into the team? Are they going to bring value to us as a team? And I think that's where it's really important that you start to sort of maybe be a little bit more self-aware of yourself and your skills, and what value outside of just being able to sort of sit at a desk and do the work, like what else are you going to bring to the team? Because that's really what we want. We want people who are going to bring energy, passion, and drive. And I think that's, if you can get your foot in the door, I think selling that is a big part of what I would be looking for, particularly in early careers roles. I want to feel like you want this job, and you're going to come in and you're going to be hungry to learn, and you're going to take everything on board, and use your initiative and be pragmatic. And yeah, I think a bit of a rambly answer there, but I guess that's kind of sorts of things I'm looking at.
No, that's okay. It's helpful. I'm just going to expand on that a little further as well, if you don't mind. So, just using that
Mhm.
example there, you had 88 applications for an open sort of advert, as it were, which, having recruited myself, and we were talking about this the other day, I know that can take up a phenomenal amount of time, and so being able to stand out as an applicant is really important. Um, we also had a quick chat about this one as well. So just for the people listening who are probably going through this sort of process at the moment, um, the question of, this is a creative designer style role. Do you think that creative CVs versus traditional CVs being used to stand out are a good thing, a bad thing? How can you make those sorts of things work so I shine out of that 88 that you have on your desk?
Yeah, yeah. I think so. Yeah, there's a couple of things in that. So just speaking like pulling back the curtain and explaining what we do. We have a system called Web Recruit in JISC, which is where you go online, you fill in some pre-screener questions, and you upload your CV to this system. That will then essentially, it scrapes a load of information off your CV and then spits that into some sort of pages that give us, things like your career history, your contact details, any kind of web address. And this is an automated system that does that. It's not the best system in the world. And when we got this system, I'm not going to lie, I spent about 3 hours triaging a bunch of CVs before I realized I could actually look at people's CVs on there. And then I was like, oh, I've now realized here's the bit where you can actually click and download people's CVs. So then, yeah, I had to spend even more time going back through everyone's CVs to make sure I wasn't rejecting anyone unfairly. But yeah, I would say in terms of like the creative CVs, I've definitely seen people that have taken that too far. And that is a big turn off, where people over design their CV, and try to make it too whizzy. I think anyone kind of who's gone online and looked at anything to do with like how to create a great CV, I think the advice would be avoid having any kind of like infographic elements on there that sort of show your skills, or like, I'm 5 stars for, on Sketch, but I'm only 3 stars on Figma, or something like that. It's just, for me, that's waffle. That's irrelevant. We can teach you the tools. I don't care how skilled you are in that. It's the other stuff that I want to get to. And I know we were having this conversation, Matt, in the sort of the pre-meet, but you really need to think, when you're designing your CV, about the who the user is, and you essentially need to UX your CV. If you think about who the user is, you think about my scenario as a hiring manager, I've got 88 CVs to get through. And now if I spent 5 minutes, somewhere between 4 and 5 minutes on each of those CVs, that's going to take me a day, like a solid day with no breaks, to get through all of those CVs. And that was when we had an advert that was open for 48 hours, and we had to close it because the amount of applications that we had in that short space of time was just overwhelming. So we had to close that application. So you need to think about who the audience is for your CV. It's not about, well, it's certainly about you, but it's more about the hiring manager, and how can you communicate the key information that hiring manager is looking for. I'm looking for what's your career history, some kind of statement about yourself that allows me to get to know you a bit more and kind of alludes to some of the passion that you have about the field. I'm also interested in, some bullet points of like the types of skills that you've done. I'm definitely interested in your education history. Like, what courses have you done? Like, what's your background? Have you done a further education? Have you done a degree? Have you done some kind of like UX boot camp type thing? What other courses have you taken that's relevant? And also I think some people do and some people don't shy away from it. But I'm really interested in what other things have you done that maybe could relate to your role. Like if you were, I don't know, you were the like a team leader in your university sports team, and you did a load of work to like run and organize something. That in that itself, I'm learning a lot about you and maybe some of the skills that you've got that you might bring to this role. Or you may have run the social media account for your friend's club night or something like that. Or you may have written a book, for example, on something. And it's those sort of tangential things that I think are really interesting for me, that start to kind of, that they sometimes can be the difference between candidates, because you end up with people with a similar amount of experience, a similar background in education. So what else is it on their CV that, what other related skills do they have that they could be bringing to the role? So yeah, I'd definitely be looking for that. But I think first and foremost, think about who the user of your CV is and understand their context. Make it as easy as possible for me to get the information I need out of your CV as quickly as possible. So yeah, 100% substance over style.
That's good to know. Thank you. I'm sure that will help many people. I'm just aware of the time and we're coming very close to the end. So, what I would like to do then is go for a really cliched interview style question for you, Ben.
Mm-hmm.
If we could step back in time and you see yourself right when you're starting to make those decisions in your life, assuming you're going to end up in UX again because you love it so much, what's the best piece of advice you can give to younger Ben about getting his foot in the door in this career?
Oh my word! About getting my foot in the door.
Just think about when you were at college and things like that, and you're at that sort of T junction, and you weren't totally sure which way you wanted to go and stuff. What was the piece of advice you would have loved to have heard then, which you feel would really have helped?
I think just go for it. Just take the role. Just take whatever role it is, and because you never know where it'll lead you. Even if it's not even if it's not the most ideal role, you're going to learn a lot and you're going to get some experience. And if what I've learned through my career is you can really shape, if you want it, you can really shape the role that you're in the organization that you're working in. So just go, if even if it's not perfect, I don't think there's ever going to be the perfect role for you at the start of your career, but just go for it and then run with it and sort of take it in the direction that you want to take it in, and sort of push the boundaries of that role. Try everything, explore, and then assess and sort of make a decision about where you want to go next, because actually you might have learned a lot in that 1 year or 2 years you've been in that post, and then you think, actually, I don't like that element of this role. I don't like the research bit. What I really love doing is the design element of it. And then you maybe know that actually I want to go more down the UI design route, so that can help you in your career path. So yeah, I would say, yeah, just go for it. Just get something, just get that, even if it's not perfect, just take that first role and then see where it leads you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Ben. Um, that very nicely and in a very positive and lovely way, I think, brings us to the end of this session.